Welcome to my games from the Ontario Chess Challenge. So, a little bit about the tournament. It is an annual provincial tournament run by the Chess and Math Association, where each player competes with other players in their grade to compete for first place and represent their province in the national tournament. And it is a 5-round Swiss tournament where tiebreakers are determined by playoff games. So in the first round, we have me playing black versus Haley Claire on lead chess. And we both have, it's a 25 plus 5 tournament, 25 minutes for each player plus a 5-second increment. And we have 6 players in this section, 2 of which were very high rated, and 1 is a FIDE master. So white starts with e4. Switch this to my perspective. I play c6, d4, d5, the Caro Kann. Then we have the advanced variation, and I play the main line. The only other sidelines are c5 and something like g6, but f5 is 99% of the games. h4, trying to go g4 and trap my bishop. I play h5. Trade of bishops, e6, knight of 3, and then c5 would have gotten the pawn break right away, but I wanted to develop both my pieces. With b3, I was anticipating a bishop move here but that would have actually helped me because I do have some tricks with check and getting the bishop. And he did not play that. He played knight c3. I play c5, planning to bring my knight to c6 and pressuring the center. I have both my knights on d7 and c6, adding lots of pressure, which was why I wanted to put my knight on d7 first. We have knight takes, and this is not a fork because I can bring my knight here. The bishop protects the knight protects the pawn. And I kick the queen out. Development. I do not take because I don't want him to take with the pawn or the knight and improve his position. So I play queen c7. I'd rather him take. He does not take, and I put my rook on open c-file. We have a very weak knight and a weak pawn structure on the queen side. I intend to exploit that by getting these knights out of the way. So now if he captures this way, I'm going to actually recapture with the knight. I move the knight back. He plays a5, and now instead of moving this knight, I can actually play bishop b4 and pin the knight. Now that a3, it can no longer be played. This move critically forgoes control of b4 forever, and I can play bishop b4, move the knight somewhere, and then I have lots of pressure on the knight. I'm gonna win the exchange. But I missed the move. I played d4, thinking that after knight takes, I take, he takes, I take, he takes, I win the knight, but that's not true. My knight on d7 is left undefended. So what happened in the game after I played d4, I realized in this position that my knight does have some pressure, and if I take, he takes with the queen, he's going to take my knight. So I take the pawn back, so now we're equal in material again, because I did sacrifice that pawn. And we have this position. We have a weakened structure on the queen side, but I do have a weak pawn on h5. So with this move, he wants to get into d6. Before I'm attacking his pawn structure, I just prevent that with centralizing my rook. He attacks my pawn, and he wants to get into, she wants to get into f6. But I don't see that as a real threat, because I think with the move f6, knight f6, she wants me to go to g7, and then maybe get to one of the dark squares on this diagonal and do a discovered check. But I do have those squares controlled with my knight, and I'm actually going to move my knight on this turn. So I move my knight to b4. I have control over this square, and this square. So I called the bluff, and she doesn't realize that it threatens a fork. She just thinks that, okay, the pawn is being attacked, so let's move it. It's protected by the knight, but I'm actually threatening a fork. The check comes in, but I don't see any threat. If the rook takes, well, we could just recapture, and we still have that fork there. queen e4, I take, win the pawn, b4, rook here, attacking the queen and the pawn, and if the queen moves away from the rook, I can take it. So it has to go on e3, e2, or you could actually get rook here. But I think something like check, and then taking, or check, and then, I don't know, check, and then, actually no, if the rook comes here, we could have check, and then we can have here, importantly, because now he has to move the queen. If he moves the queen, well, I get the rook, and if he does this, I take with check, and he's gonna lose the queen. So, like, if it goes here, I win. So, you can't move that rook there. You can move your queen to e3, but unfortunately, she doesn't see that. She leaves her rook undefended, and I have mate in 3 moves. 1, and now I check with the rook instead of, well, I mean, I don't really have any other way to check, because if I check here, well, I'm just going to get g3. And yeah, I can take the pawn, but I want to checkmate faster. So I check, knowingly sacrifice the rook. And obviously, from visual perspective, I don't think she's going to put the queen in the way, so I am going to get checkmate next move. Like, the problem is, once the white king takes the rook, I have check on h1, and the escape squares are all blocked or have been taken, and the queen is too far away to help. And that's game 1. So we have game 2 between me and SpongeBob SquareHorse. I play white, and this is not going by Lee chess ratings. It's from a different rating system, so that's why the ratings might look a little weird, but just ignore it. I go d4, my main move, d5, c4, knight f3, c6, and I play knight c3, this is the semi-Tarrasch, by the way, where instead of knight f6, we go straight for a c5. This leaves black with an isolated queen's pawn, and instead of going g3, the main line, I like to play e3, because normally semi-Tarrasch players don't want to have an equal position. Well, actually, no, if he takes, I'm taking with the knight. The point is that I reinforce this square, and, I'm not going to take with the pawn, but I'm actually going to take with the knight, leaving this as an isolated pawn, improving my knight position, going to bring my bishop to f3, and my plan is to play a3, b4, bishop b2, rook c1, knight a4, knight c5, and expand on the queen side while maintaining defense on my king side, bring my bishop to f3, playing g3, h4, and the point is, I have the pawn structure with these 2 pawns gone. I have a3 and b4, my bishop on b2, and my pawn, the way that the position is set up is one that I'm very comfortable with. So I don't take on c5 before, I take on c5 now, when the bishop has moved. Because again, I know he's a semi-Tarrasch player. I'm not worried that he's going to take my pawn. So he moves the bishop, I take, so he moves it again. He's wasted 2 moves getting this pawn, getting to c5, and now he has an isolated pawn, and now I can prepare a3, b4, attack this bishop with tempo. He's going to have to move it. I get to develop my bishop to a very nice diagonal, and bring my rook over, knight a4, and just expand. And I have a perfectly solid structure. He has an isolated queen's pawn, and obviously because he's black, he's going to have to wait before he actually gets his attack off. You know, he's one move. I'm white, so obviously I start with the move, so I get the first move, so obviously I'm going to be ahead in the position, so he's not going to be able to attack right away, like white would be able to if he had the isolated queen's pawn. We have castles, a3, preparing b4. Usually in these positions, you have black playing a5, trying to prevent the expansion to b4, which I would have played, but then the control of b5 is now weakened permanently. No pawns can control it. You can now get your knight to d5 this way, develop your bishop to c3. Like, once you get your knight here, you can develop your bishop to c3, and you still have a perfectly fine position where you can develop your queen, rooks, g3, bring your bishop back, and you can maintain a good pawn structure and attack the d5 weakness. And if you take the c6 weakness. But we don't see a5. We see bishop e6, protecting the pawn. I don't go here because I don't want him to take and open up the f file. This actually protects the pawn. Like, if I were him, I would want the knight to come to g5. I would definitely provoke the trade with h6. Sacrificing some control of the light squares, but the f file does open up, and you have this very deadly bishop. I think moving this a pawn even to a6 would have been fine, because this bishop, in my opinion, needs to stay on this diagonal, because it shouldn't come back to d6. I think that bring it back to a7 or b6, develop this bishop, rook here, then you can put your bishop on this diagonal if you want, behind the rook. Don't block in your rook yet. But no, we don't see a move with the a pawn. I have b4, bishop b2, knight a5, threatening to capture the important dark square bishop, opening up the bishop, opening up the c file, threatening to come to c5, a multi-purpose move. He moves his bishop. There are two minor pieces on the c file. It's an completely open file. I'm definitely putting a rook there. We have rook d8, protecting, putting it on the same file as my queen. A good idea. I have knight c5, threatening to take a pawn that is defending the knight and threatening to capture it thereafter, because I have my rook on the open c file. Now, obviously he can take with check and recapture my knight, but then the c6 knight is weakened a lot, and I do get his bishop for my knight. And this bishop critically helps him have control over d4. And by getting rid of his dark square bishop, I have superior control over the dark squares. He has no piece that can help him. Now he moves his knight to e4, wanting me to take and attack twice. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. It's a good move, centralizes the knight, but I'm taking the trade. By the way, this move took black 5 minutes. Why is this? I don't know. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna go back here, and there we go. Okay, so the highlighter is off. So took him 5 minutes to find the move knight e4, and I felt I was comfortable. I was actually good in this position, because if it takes him 5 minutes to find a move like that, I think that, I have him by the ropes. I'm the one who's in control of the position. I take. I spend 5 minutes on this move, making sure that there's no tactics, no quick attack on the king side. My knight is critically protecting important squares that black could use to invade with the queen. We see a trade, and I spend 2.5 minutes on this move. You can actually I'm going to put the link of this study in the description so you can see more details of it that I might not be able to mention. I spend 2.5 minutes. The point is I'm attacking c6, connecting my rooks. He's going to have to defend, and my bishop can now come to a6, and I'm overall adding pressure to the queen side, and my rook can come to the d file. But first, obviously, I have to come back to g1 to defend f2. So I think that he should have played. Let me just get rid of these arrows. He should play bishop d7 in this position, because rook c8 obviously comes with a skewer, and bishop d7. Now he threatens to move his knight, which is important. Like, this basically says this move is not good. You shouldn't have done it. I probably would have offered the trade of queens and continued. Like, obviously the trade of queens benefits me. I have the superior structure. That's what I would have done. He probably would have moved this queen. If he moved it to c7, well, I have bishop here actually to check. If he tries to check. But, I would trade queens. I'd have a superior pawn structure, superior position. Instead of playing, bishop d7 holds on, I guess. Instead of playing that, he plays knight here, which gives up control of e5, which is critical to my attack. Now, this queen is short of squares. Like, the queen can't go to the c file. He cannot go to a6. He can go to b6, b8, d7, and this takes control. This move, bishop e5, takes control of b8. It centralizes my bishop, takes control of so many diagonals, prevents any check on that diagonal, and prevents any check on the diagonal. And I threatened rook here, which which forks both the knight and the queen cannot defend the knight. This knight is undefended. So I intend to bring my rook in, and I can get control of the diagonals. And this queen is really short on squares. Like, I could play bishop a6, and then after, like, I could play, you know, after, let's say, like, if queen comes to b6, I have here. But if the knight comes here, I could, which I actually did, I could play bishop a6, and then the queen is short on squares. If the queen goes b6, I can play bishop c7. I have lots of control. I'm limiting the mobility of this queen, and I have so much control over the queen side. My bishops are doing a fantastic job, and my rook and my queen all complementing each other. We have knight g6 attacking the bishop, and I play, if you would like to pause, just don't, like, do yourself a favor and don't look at this side of the screen. If you want to guess what this move is, you can. The move is bishop c7, and what this does, blocks the queen from moving, from escaping. It blocks the queen, supported by the rook, and it attacks a rook. And if the rook moves, well, we have bishop a6, and the queen is trapped. Now, the move here is to actually let the exchange happen with queen c8, because after I take, he can retake with the queen, and if he tries to defend, well, I have bishop a6, and I get the queen. So he has to play queen c8, and then just try and live with the exchange. I do give up some control of the dark squares, so I'm not sure if I would have given up the dark square bishop, because I could have played bishop a6. The only move is here. I could have played bishop here. He goes back. Maybe he doesn't go back. Maybe he goes here. But I have, like, he goes back. I could repeat, honestly, if I wanted to, but I could take, and then take, and then potentially, like, bishop here attacks and puts pressure. I can go here potentially. I'd actually come with this rook because I want this defended. Like, I'd be up in exchange, but I also do lose control of the dark squares. So something needs to be addressed here. The dark squares, now he has more control of the king side. So in the end, he did not find the move queen c8, and he thought his queen was lost for good. He plays rook d7, and he gets a bishop and a rook for his queen. Now, obviously, it's better for me. I'm winning, but I still need to convert the position, and it's not that easy because I do have some coordination issues. Like, my queen is protecting the bishop, but the bishop, okay, controlling c8. He can manage. He can play rook here and just build a fort. That's what he wants. So I centralize my knight. I don't want him to advance at all, and I'm putting pressure on this bishop. We have him centralizing his knight, threatening to put pressure on f2. I play f3 because I want to control this square and then attack the knight too. We have a relocation of the knight to c4. And now I have this pawn weak and needs to be defended. Okay, queen b3, defends. Yes, it's on the same diagonal, but this outpost is good. Not going anywhere. This bishop is a little isolated. I could always take, but then they have a passed pawn that is well protected. So I'm in no hurry to take. So this move here, very critical. This is a weakening of the king side. This weakens the g6 square, and I noticed that potentially, if I take some time in the future, you have isolated, like, two sets of isolated two pawns, and I can take advantage of that in the future and attack on the king side. So that's what h5 does. He wants to march it down and put pressure on the king side, but I think it opens it up, and with a versatile queen, I think I could exploit that. But first, I need to bring my king to f2 so that this queen isn't stuck defending the pawn. We have knight back, king up here, rook d2. I want to bring my rook to the c file. I couldn't do that with the rook there, because, you know, he could just take it. And I have rook here. Okay, if you're going to move this knight, we're going to trade rooks, and it's going to bring me one step closer to the endgame. We have king there, and now that's the move that permanently weakens the king side. I now can bring my queen over to h7, And the expected move, well, the expected move was king g8, and this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to fork. His position is very weak. I have now been able to finally convert, and after I got what I wanted from the queen side, now I can go to the king side. But he plays g6. He plays g6, and now I can take. And now I have the king side open, and I'm just going to win lots of material. Importantly, he wanted to go here. I don't think that would have been that much of a threat, but eventually I win on time here. And let's see how much time. Where were we? Here? So with queen a4, yeah, I think I spent 2.5 minutes. I just want to quickly go over the amount of time I spent. So we have about 1.5 minutes here, 2 minutes here, and then we have a minute with bishop e5, a minute with that move, then we have a minute with that, and then I just, spent 1 minute per move. I actually spent 2.5 minutes finding king g1 because I needed to free up my queen in order to continue my attack. I can't have my queen defending. And, I barely spent any time because, this is just cleanup time after this point. So, game 3, I get black again. Let's flip the board. I now have 2 wins after the first 2 rounds. And I'm playing Mahdi Maverick, who's rated 1748, the third round. And again, well, not again, actually. We get a London system. So, London players are passive. You want to attack them and pressure them. They don't want a complex position. They want a solid system. c5, I can tell you, when I was learning the London, I was like, ooh, I don't like to move c5. It puts pressure on my position. I'm like, you know what? The London is not a good opening because it doesn't, you're constantly just defending against black's threats. So we have development of the knights. And my c-pawn has advanced to c5. And bishop b5, I provoke the knight coming here. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I didn't want the knight, the pawn coming to c3, which is a typical, London structure. Now, this is a bit weaker, and the knight is on an awkward square. The bishop is under pressure. And a good move here would be to just pin the knight, because even though this bishop is weak, it is pressuring, and he does want to come to e5. So I do have that. And I think the important move here is to take. And after queen takes, we get e5. And after bishop here, we get here. And then we get here, and this attacks the knight critically. Like, even though he could take, I could take. And then if he takes, actually no, sorry, the move is not here because then we have bishop takes, but we have e5, queen here, and then we have, like, I think the move maybe would have been here, but I think I should not have taken right away. Like maybe provoke here so that he takes, and then when he provokes, I can take. But right now, I can take on c5. The problem with what I played is that he can play a3, and if I played e6 to try and capture the c5 pawn, but he can play a3, and if I take, he takes. He does a fork, and this rook is defended, so I can't take, exploiting a pin. So he actually missed that idea and just canceled, so I play, like, I'm an idiot, okay, so I didn't see that, but he didn't see the idea, so, and how much move did he spend? I mean, he only spent, like, 20 seconds, so we have the provocation of the capture, and now he captures, because this knight, he doesn't want to defend it forever, so he plays a3, threatening the fork, but now I put my queen on a6, and I've controlled the diagonal. I'm threatening to come to c4. If after a move like b5, I mean, this is just a bad structure. I mean, okay, you have your bishop coming here, but my knight's coming in, and this bishop is really weak. These pawns are weak. I'm going to be up 2 pawns in that variation. So obviously b4 is not possible. We have bishop here because he wants to come here and have a solid pawn structure with c3. Or he wants to maybe not trade, but he wants to take the knight, and I think the knight can actually be a very useful piece. So I play knight d7. We have bishop to g3. Oops, not the arrow. I have queen c4, putting lots of pressure on the knight and the pawn. If the knight moves, I could take, and then if we have rook here, this bishop is protected, and I could play queen here, if b4 here, and this pawn is protected as well. So that's what this knight actually does. But I think he could take, and if I take, the bishop comes here, e4. Okay, well, I just want a pawn there. But after here, he proposes a trade, which I accept because of the following moves. I can expand in the center with my pawns. I have e5, taking control of some dark squares, and I have f4, and I'm threatening to block in that bishop and expand my control over this diagonal. He plays knight e2, trying to get some control over here, and I add another pawn to help my control. I mean, just look at this. Look at these pawns. This is protecting that. And we have all these pawns controlling so many squares. Like that. Just insane. And my bishop is helping control this diagonal. We have the pawn controlling this one. My pawn mass is just insane, and it's very scary. I mean, let's just look at it from his perspective. Look at that. That's just scary. And he has no pawns in the center. No, he doesn't even have any pawns on the 4th rank. I have 4 pawns on the 5th rank, which is insane, and he blunders. This is a bad move because he forgets to protect the e3 pawn, which I can take with check, and then critically, I captured towards the center, and now he just blundered 2 pawns. I have connected pass pawns, 1, 2, 3, 4 connected pass pawns, no pawn opposition. I have an outpost for my bishop, and I'm just winning this game now. This is a win. We have rook here, bishop there. Okay, I'm going to advance my pawns. They're all going to... And after that, we have c3, the final it's the final blunder, and white resigns, and I win the game as black. Okay, so round 4, I've won. I'm now the only one who doesn't have a loss. Won all my games. Everyone in my section has a loss. I'm playing the FIDE Master, Positional Genius, round 4. I play white, and we have d4, knight f6, c4, and I don't know why, but I didn't think to go for the Catalan in this position, even though it is my favorite opening, and I just play knight f3, going into the Queen's Indian anti-Nimzo variation. Then we have the bishop g5, where you have to trade on f6, and you just develop a sort of meaningless structure that benefits black. And I actually initiate the trade of pieces and the trade of queens, which benefits him, because when you have the superior pawn structure, you do want to trade queens, and I have the inferior pawn structure. These c-pawns are very weak, especially by the move c5. I think, in my opinion, I should just take and let one of the pawns recapture, because having a pawn in front of weak pawns is a bit harder. It's a bit harder for black to attack these pawns. But you could have some capture here, and then a rook here waiting to capture c4. We have knight here, d5. I just don't know why I'm playing these moves. I didn't think. I mean, look, I still have over 20 minutes on my clock. I'm not thinking on these moves. He's bringing his king. Excellent idea. I advance on the king side. What choice do I have? Now, I bring my king to f2 to protect my rook, and I make a mistake here. I play rook here, and that was the wrong idea. I was supposed to bring my king here, and I mean, if he takes, that's fine for me. But the point is that let's say he plays another move. I bring my king here, and I'm protecting my pawns. I mean, now this knight is free, and I can transfer it elsewhere. I mean, his king is not doing anything. My king is protecting my weak pawns, and it's protected. So I don't really need to do anything. Now I can open up the position. But the problem is that I opened up the position when now I have this pinned pawn. Now my rook is undefended, and I can't do anything. So I have to sacrifice this pawn. I attack the rook, but I move back because I really can't do anything. I'm going to relocate my knight to f3. I sacrifice a pawn. I try to maintain as many pieces on the board as possible because I'm down a pawn, and I'm just losing. And the threat here, obviously, if he takes, I get some pawns on the back rank, so he wants to prevent that by playing f6, and now he can bring his rook back. He didn't actually take it, so obviously I want to preserve, but I'm down a pawn, and I literally made a mistake for no reason. It's not that he was playing well, it's just that I just provoked myself into playing a bad move for absolutely no reason, and I was at 20 minutes, wasting so much time. But now, okay, so we have these moves, and obviously I don't trick, but I do have a time advantage, and this pawn structure is a little weak. Light squares are weak, and I could come to f5, so I do gain a little bit of hope in this position and maybe getting a draw. I spend a minute on finding this move, and I don't want to trade rooks, so obviously I advance my king. I want to protect my pawns. These pawns critically control squares that the knight wants to invade in. And the idea with this move, like the reason he wanted me to protect this pawn first is because he wanted me to leave the defense of the pawn, attack it, provoke me to defend it again, and now I have to defend 2 pawns, and he just wins it. So I'm like, you know what? I see his idea, and I'm gonna lose one of the pawns, so I have to attack his pawns. And we have this move right here. So this move, puts pressure on f4. So obviously this came to mind. Pawn takes, and to move my knight to f7 to attack this pawn. But if we have knight f7, we actually have rook f4, forking my king and knight, like that. So in the game, I play g3. So now that if I take recaptures knight f7, this is no longer possible. So he goes back to attack this pawn. I'm like, you know what? Now I'm threatening to take it with 2 pawns. So this is going to force a capture no matter what. And now I have a passed pawn. So things are actually looking up for me. He has a passed pawn, but so do I. Even though I'm down a pawn, I have chances. So I'm going to move my knight here, obviously, but I don't want him to, I'm going to move my knight. With this move, he wants to get behind the pawn, but he also wants to check and get my rook on e3 and trade rooks, which will benefit him. He can just bring his knight back, sacrifice, and I can't get to this pawn. So I want to play my knight here, but first I have to play king g3 so that he doesn't come to h3 and forces the trade rooks. So if we have here, well, he's just going to keep checking me, and he's going to force my king to go in the direction. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to e2. I'll just go to f2. You move your rook. My rook is critically blocking this file from the knight or the king entering. So now it's a race. He's advancing his pawns, and he wants his pawn to be connected. Now, there's one move here that draws the game. This is an equal position, but look at the time situation. I have 10 seconds on my clock. He has 30. I missed the move. I couldn't find the drawing move. I lost the game by playing rook e1. This was the blunder. I couldn't find, with the 10 seconds I had, I could not find the drawing move. Rook d3. Why? Why does this draw? Well, for one, if we have, let's say, king here, we could what is the move here? I think it's knight here, but b6, we have b6. I think it's, what's it called? Man, what was the move? We probably have here, and then if here, we have the move here was rook e1, and the position is equal. But what happens if the knight, we have knight here, I generally don't know. Let's say we have rook here. Okay, but what if he goes here? Ah, okay. So now the point is I'm able to get my knight to help in the defense of the pawn promotion. And I still have my pawn threatening to promote here. So this rook is overloaded. And the point is, if he moves here, well, I'm just going to take the pawn, sacrifice, and if he takes, well, I'm promoting. So he's not going to advance. He's going to promote. I take, takes, promote to a queen. He's going to promote to a queen. I'm not going to be able to stop it, but I will be able to check him to get a draw. Or, after takes, I could take, he guards. If he checks, well, I'm just going to take, and if he goes here, and he's just going to have to take, and he's going to sacrifice, he's going to get his king to block the pawn and sacrifice his knight for the draw. So that was the first variation, where you have king here. Now, obviously, if we have king e8, we promote, and king c8, we promote, so he cannot push his king to this rank. So, what if we have king here? Well, now we have here, and this is the same idea. Check, the king comes here, check, and we get the pawns. We get the knight to c4 to stop the pawns. And then we could have checks. And it's a draw, the point was to get my knight to c. Like, the threat in this position, I need to get my knight to c4 to control these squares. Because that's where the pawns are headed. And I didn't see that I could get there. I didn't see the variations. I had 10 seconds. I blew it with... Actually, no. I still had the draw here because I could still get my knight to c4. Wow. The blunder was the promotion. I should not have promoted. So I should have played here. And if we have here, again. So, I mean, rook e1, rook d3 probably would have been better because it would have forced the situation. And obviously, and I just run out my clock here. I mean, I really have no. We have the promotion. And I mean, I don't know what to do here, so I lose. I missed the draw. Critically important. Middle game, I lost a pawn. Black was winning. I was able to get back, but I could not find the draw, and I lose the game. So now I have my first loss. Everyone has at least one loss. Me and Positionalist Genius are the only ones to have one loss so far. Everyone else has more than one loss. We have game 5 versus, let me turn off the engine, versus Nicky Chmicky. He is playing white. I am playing black. We have e4, c6, another Carl Khan, but this time the mainline variation. Now I've been actually getting into knight f6 to get the Bronstein-Larsen, where I could maybe potentially get my bishop to g4, trade, and I do have an open g5, and maybe get my bishop to g7, attack the structure, because usually the pawn comes to c3. But we have the mainline variation. This is all mainline. Bishop d2 to prevent the provocation of c3. Queen c7. a5. Okay, the mistake here. I need to castle and get my king to one side or the other because these pawns are weak. I could castle king side. I could castle queen side. Get my knight to d5. Provoke c4. And then maybe get it back to e7, f5. Do something. And this g4 pawn storm is just much stronger than my a5 pawn storm. And I blunder here. I'm actually losing in this position because we have h6 undermining the defense of the knight. See, the thing is, bishop d6 is an alright move, but bishop coming to e7 basically defends against the idea of g5, so that if h6 comes, you can take, and the defense of this knight is not undermined. But with h6, I can't take. Obviously, it's defended, so I have to bring my bishop back. I mean, this just looks really ugly. I mean, he could actually just take, and I mean, maybe we could. No, we wouldn't see the sacrifice, but we would see this. And I mean, I'm not gonna advance, but this pawn is very advanced and defended, and I mean, I can't really do anything. There is no coordination between my pieces, and my attack on my pawn storm on the queen side is a bluff. It's really not going to do anything. But he misses it, thankfully, and he just takes. And that actually helps me because this pawn is in a weaker position, and the knight comes to the queen side. A fork, but I can just move my rook or actually no, I check first because I don't want to trade my bishop, and I want to have my bishop guarding this square, importantly. Rook to f5, takes. Now, I was expecting this move to defend the pawn. Obviously, it blocks the e-file, which actually helps me. Like, he has pressure on the e-file, and this blocks it. It might add central control, but I can invade, and I still have like a bunch of pawns around my king. It's safe. I could play b5, defend this pawn. So it does stop his attack, and I think he wanted to maintain pressure on the e-file, but the problem is I get the pawn now, and I'm just up a pawn, and the fork is defended. The double attack is defended with rook to h6, guarding the f6 pawn. I want to guard it with my king now, get it to safety, guard it with my king, avoid rook g8 check, and defend f6 so that my rook is free. We have my queen attacking, rook there. He provokes the trade of queens. He gets his king here to defend f2 so that he can move his rook, because otherwise I would have brought my rook there. But now I want to invade into his on his queen side, on the back rank, and get the queen side pawns. He brings his king back. I attack. I put pressure here so that he comes to e3, so that I can provoke this f3. Importantly, come to d5. If he takes, I undouble my pawns. He might have checked, but I could just come back and then check the king, and he would be in danger. So he doesn't do that, undoubling my pawns. He blunders with king d3, and now I have the pawn. If the rook comes to defend, well, I just take, and I just have, even though I have doubled pawns on the f-file, I have a pawn majority on the queen side. Whoa. Okay. Let's get back. Okay, so rook check. I take. He wants to invade now. I pressure this. He pressures my b pawn. I defend. He defends. He checks and defends the f pawn. But the problem is that now I force the trade of rooks. So now I'm completely winning. I just have to convert now. And now we have a famous position. Now I have this f6 move, or else this would have been a draw. Where I'd have to, actually no, I'd have to move my king there, but you know, it would have given him a chance. I don't want to do that. I want to kick his king out, and I don't promote. Now I was actually thinking, you know, I'll just choose a rook. But the thing is, I had my auto promote on during, like, this was an online tournament, so I had my auto promote on, and I was thinking, you know what? I don't want to risk having my auto promote ruin the game for me, and then having to go to the arbiter saying, I had it on, meant to obviously I'm not going to promote to a queen, and then I don't want to risk the chance of getting a stalemate, so I just move my king, and the promotion comes with check. I put my queen here, and I just rotate my king around for a checkmate, and white resigns. Okay, so the situation after round 5. I have 4 wins, 1 loss, and Positional Genius also has 4 wins and 1 loss. We're both tied, and the rules for 2 people tied for first is they play a playoff game to determine the winner. They need to clear first place. And you might think, you know, well, he beat me, so he might get the tie breaks, you know, based on the head-to-head matches. But that's not how they did this tournament. They needed to clear first, so they had a playoff game between me and Positional Genius. And I got white in the game again. And this time, I wanted to avoid the Queen's Indian. So I actually could have still gone with c4, e6, and play the Catalan. But I didn't think of that. I wanted to play knight f3 to maybe play e3, c6, get into that position that I got into round 2, which I won. He plays d5, and now I get to play the Catalan. And in the Catalan, you lose a pawn on c4 usually, and sometimes black is able to keep it, but you do get some central and kingside space, and black is a little cramped. So I do like the Catalan because it does give you lots of space. And this is my mistake. I play e5 too early. I have to prepare it first because keeping control of d5 is important. and I don't need to rush e5. e5, usually you want to do that to gain control of kingside, to get kingside space and attack. But I could have prepared that better with h4 and playing e4, getting my knight, playing queen c2, e4, knight g5, and then doing that. Like, I should play like h4, a3, queen c2, connect my rooks, and then make an advancement in the center. But I rush it, and I play knight e4, and now we have b5, preparing to fianchetto the bishop, defend this knight, and now the pawn's defended, I can't get it. And now I want to prevent b4, because if b4 comes now, it's going to isolate his pawns, which is a benefit for me. And I also want to prevent any of the knights coming in and the bishop coming in to control c2. And I want to bring my queen to c2. So he plays bishop b7, it cannot be attacked. And obviously if he plays b4 and tries to get his knight there, I'm taking the pawn. So we have knight takes, and the reason I had put my bishop there earlier is for this exact situation. For when it's captured, I have my pawn defending d4, and I open up my f file. Now the move here is f5. Black has an advantage in this position, but it's not so clear. The key move here is f5 because it takes away, I have to take with my e-pawn or else I don't have any pressure on the king side. We trade some pieces, but I don't have my pawn on e5. He has a weak pawn, but my e5 pawn was the only pawn giving me some control, some semblance of an advantage. And now that it's gone, I don't really have anything, and black has a material advantage, and I have to claw my way here. I could have moves like here, but I mean, we could just have check, and then, check, and then, yeah, he could actually just take the knight. Obviously, I'd play h4 before I play knight g5. But the thing is, I don't have a clear attack, and we have traded some pieces. But he doesn't find the idea of f5, and instead he plays knight a5, threatening to come to b3, preparing c5, and opening up the bishop. So what do? c5 and knight b6 are no longer useful because it doesn't come with tempo, and c5, I can take the pawn with tempo on the queen. So that's what it does. And I could bring it to d2 and double up on the f file potentially. So we have knight b3 anyway. And with h4, I'm intending to come to g5. And obviously if he captures, I'm just going to recapture with my knight. I want to come to g5, put pressure on h7. Like let's say he plays a nothing move. g5, and let's say just again, I have knight f6. And if he takes, I have checkmate. So that's just a good representation to show what knight g5 does. And it also opens up the f file. So we have h6, preventing g5. Again, f5, he needs to play it. He needs to play it right now. Okay, centralizes the bishop. It's now on an outpost protected by a pawn, and it adds control over the queen side, and he can begin a pawn storm. Like this c4 pawn, now protected, he can advance his pawns. We have rook f2, and that's actually knight d2 was important in getting the knight to capture, so we can double up on the f file, which is now open for us. So we have bishop d5, rook f2, I have pressure on the f file. Okay, I have active pieces. This is what the Catalan offers. I'm getting something. We have c5, rook f4, and if he ever trades, I'm going to have two pieces over protecting d4. That's what I'm anticipating, because after this trade, it becomes very weak. Now, this bishop is actually very good for black in maintaining an outpost, putting pressure on two diagonals. And it's better than my knight. But he trades it. And now, the position is equal. Black, his pawn structure, he has an extra pawn, but I have some pressure. And I have, all my pieces are active. My queen is centralized. I mean, you can just tell, like, what it can see. My bishop is open. All my pawns are controlling squares that the bishop can go to, so the bishop has no mobility. Dark squares. My rooks are active, and I have an attack on the king side. Now we have b4, what I anticipated at the start. Now we have some isolated pawns. and b2 is attacked, so I'm just going to simply defend it. We have queen b8, queen e2 defending, and now he comes to b6, which I mean, I don't know why he didn't do that at the start, because queen b8 is obviously inferior to queen b6. You could now open up your rook. So he wastes a move. Okay, whatever. Centralize my bishop. It can see on all the diagonals, and I have some plans to move it back here, maybe create a queen bishop battery, but that plan is halted because I need to defend g3, and f5 comes. And now if I move my bishop back, it's not so clear because now we have pressure. Now we have moves that can prevent my battery. For example, we could have queen c6 check. That's what I was anticipating. This diagonal would now be opened up. So I'm like, you know what? Let's not make that battery. Let's keep this structure there. I'm going to clamp down on his position and maintain my control of the light squares. If the queen comes to check, I'll put my king on a3. I'm not going to plan for the battery, so I don't need to worry about that. And I still have pressure on these pawns. So if he ever takes, I have this as an insurance policy. Triples on the b file. I can't defend it anymore. This pawn is lost. Time to grab the pawn and safeguard my king on h3. We have queen b6, rook here, rook there, because this pawn was undefended. I was threatening to take it, and it can't move because of the pin. So we have queen b6, rook here. I win a pawn, and queen b7 baits me to take this pawn, but he's actually going to come to h1 and give me a check. And that's going to put my king out in the open, which I don't want. So I play d5. I advance my passed pawn, and I prevent his queen from invading. And we have a blunder with rook c8. And now I get the pawn. The trade of queens would have actually helped me because I have a passed pawn. That's like the thing is, even though we have different colored bishop, my king is much better than his. My pawn is very close to promotion, and I can create an outpost like that, and he really doesn't have anything, and I can still advance my kingside pawns. And he blunders. Queen d7. I have pressure on this rook. He's pressuring the pawn and pinning the rook, but I have bishop here, and now he can't take because I can take this rook. So he moves the rook, but now I take the bishop, and the queen can't take my bishop, so I got a bishop for free. So he takes the pawn, arguing that if you move here, I'll take it, and you have no real way of defending this bishop. You have to do something. Maybe I could have played bishop e6, like let's say bishop e6, queen, actually no. The threat is, if you're going to try and move the bishop, we have check, and I'm going to take. But there is a tactic here. Let me just get rid of these. But there's a tactic here for white, and it wins the game. Like, this is the winning tactic because of the black's weak structure and poorly positioned king and the unfortunate position of the queen. Now you can pause here to find the move, but I'm going to say right now it is rook takes h6, sacrificing the rook. But the point is, after we take, we have a fork on e6. Just fantastic. Wins the game on the spot, and this is a win for white. After we have queen e6 check forking, we just have resigns from black, and I win the game. So that is the 6 games from my experience in the Ontario Chess Challenge. Hope you guys enjoyed. Check out more videos on the channel, and I'll see you later. Bye.